Did you know that your astrological birth chart can tell you what issues you may have or wounds surrounding your father or father figure? Watch this video where I'm going to break down what exactly your daddy issues are based off of this one planet that you can find in your birth chart. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Isabelle, your spiritual rebel friend, and today we are talking about father wounds or daddy issues in your astrological birth chart. This is a planet that everyone has in their natal chart that you can find to discover what exact father wounds you may experience, as well as additional numerous themes which we'll dive into today. In today's video specifically, I'm going to cover the planet in your chart that indicates your father or father figure wounds, why this planet shows us our father wounds, how to find this planet in your chart, this planet in each sign and what your daddy issue may be, and how to heal this father wound. Because understanding this planetary placement in your chart is not just helpful in saying, cool, yay, I have dad wounds, amazing, whether my dad was present or not in the household. Understanding this planetary placement can help us work through the unconscious wounds that may be presenting themselves to us in our lives and in dating and being a magnet for detrimental or challenging scenarios in our life. So hence why at the end of this video, I want to provide some practical tips for working through the energies of this planet based off of your unique father wound so that you can come from a healed place in your life and in relationships specifically. Before I dive in, before we get any further, be sure to book a reading in the link in the description below, where in 1 hour we can dive deep into any and everything about your chart, transits, and more. Sky is the limit. Learn more about what kinds of things we can go into in readings in the link in the description below. 1 hour long, learn more down below. If you like my teaching style, check out my other offerings down in the link in the description below, such as my astrology bundle, my astrology course, and my ongoing coaching program. So first and foremost, what is the planet in our natal birth chart or natal chart that indicates our father wounds or daddy issues, so to say? And again, this is something we all have, which for anyone who's familiar with astrology, who's been researching astrology, this will come as a no-brainer. They already know what I'm about to say, which is the planet Saturn. Saturn is commonly known as the planet of restriction, simply put, or contraction, which is very true. When we have hard aspects to Saturn, when Saturn is in certain placements in our chart, it creates a feeling of restriction or contraction. Saturn is also the god of time, and so it represents restriction in the sense of how we create a linear reality or what we perceive as the rules for life. But there's also a layer deeper here, and this is why Saturn has a lot to tell us about our father figure wounds. Saturn specifically is our authority. It is how we perceived authority in early years. And so oftentimes our Saturn can tell us how we perceived our authority figure. Now, in a few cases, I have noticed for those who either had absent father figures or for those who had a very authoritative mom, Saturn may more resonate as your father or as your mother figure because it's going to the authority figure. But more often than not, Saturn has two ways of expressing itself, a positive and more negative, that can indicate to us how exactly we perceived our father. But with that as well, because it dictates how we perceive our father, and given that Saturn also represents the restriction that we give to our lives, the rules that we give ourselves for life, basically, what this symbolically represents is the way we perceived our father figure gives us an unconscious belief about the rules of life. The restrictions our father figure modeled are the restrictions we take to life. And so understanding your Saturn placement, the sign it's in, will tell you how you perceived your father figure, in both a positive and negative way, potentially, where you felt like they provided you authority and where they felt like they restricted you. And it also tells you what the unconscious beliefs are that are based off of your father figure that you take to life that keep you in restricted modes of being, keep you in a sense of responsibility, and keep you critical of yourself. So in summary, understanding your Saturn understands what wounds you may unconsciously have around your father figure, how you perceived your father, and how this now affects your life. Because Saturn in our chart, simply put, brings restriction. And so understanding your Saturn placement tells you what restrictions are unconsciously driving your life, or where you feel an unconscious restriction. But this is all rooted, once again, in your childhood based off of how you perceived your father figure. So how exactly do you understand how or what kind of father figure you perceived yourself to have? That is based off of the sign in which your Saturn is in. So I want to briefly go through a rough, simple overview of what it means to have your Saturn in each sign and how to find this in your chart. So once you figure out, and I will explain how to find Saturn in your chart in just a second, but once you know what sign it's in, check out the timestamps in the description box below to jump to your sign, or just watch through and listen to everyone's different kinds of father figures they may have perceived in their life. So I don't remember whether I'm going to put on the left or right, but this will be the symbol for Saturn in your chart. It looks like a cross with a rainbow out of it. I don't know what else to call it. There is, I think, a bit of a symbolic meaning in the idea of the cross being a part of the Saturn symbol, with the idea of, so to say, Jesus dying at the cross, which for those who don't like religion and astrology crossing over, sorry, not sorry. The idea here, in a philosophical sense, is the idea of what is it that we are restricting ourselves with, and so to say, this sense of responsibility of how we always say, Jesus dying at the cross. Point being, that's the symbol in your chart that's going to represent what your Saturn sign is. So look for this symbol in your astrological birth chart. You can pull it on astro.com or cafeastrology.com or numerous other websites, and they will tell you what sign your Saturn's in. You can simply look to the zodiac sign it is fixed in the birth chart wheel, or if you use, for example, Cafe Astrology, they will have a table chart where they show you what sign your Saturn is in. So now that you have identified what sign your Saturn is in, let's go through a brief overview of what it means to have your Saturn in each sign. And if you want me to dive deeper into any of these in particular, comment below and I'll film a video on Saturn in specific signs. For example, a few common themes that can come up for those who have a Saturn in a fire sign. So if your Saturn is in Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, you likely had a father figure who, in the positive, was charismatic, charming, adventurous, and almost the idea of strong. This is someone you looked at as a leader or seemed to have a lot of powerful authority, a lot of strength and assertion. In the negative, this could have been a father figure who was very aggressive, impulsive, or egotistical, as those are often common traits with the fire signs. Specifically, a Saturn in Aries may have had in the positive a father figure who is bold and independent, and in the negative, very solitary and aggressive or blunt. A Saturn in Leo likely had a father figure who was very charming, charismatic, and center stage, so to say, in their childhood oftentimes, but maybe in the negative, they were egotistical, prideful, and overly domineering. And a Saturn in Sagittarius likely had a father figure who was maybe religious, idealistic, very enthusiastic and optimistic, someone who seemed like they had a very high intelligence or visionary nature, but maybe in the negative, they seemed dogmatic, idealistic once again, or maybe even stuck in their own beliefs. And that is just some of the many traits that can present themselves with having a Saturn in the fire sign. Overall, with having Saturn in a fire sign, this means that your father figure presented a lot of either of desire in the positive or negative ways, whether that was passion, assertion, or aggression and ego. And this creates now a restriction in your life where you feel like you don't want to be this prideful, egotistical, overly confident person, or that maybe you feel like you have to take on a more prideful demeanor, more egotistical demeanor, being hyper confident. It creates one of two effects. We either suppress that energy based off of our relationship with our father figure and say, I don't want to be that, or we do unconsciously embrace those traits because that's the only authority that was modeled for us. So a Saturn in any fire sign feels the need to be full of desire, passion, intensity, and charisma for a sense of authority. However, their relationship with authority may or may not feel comfortable. And so they either suppress these traits or embrace them. If your Saturn is in an earth sign, in another example, such as Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn, you likely had a father figure who's very focused on the material reality, to the point where maybe they seem to focus too much on either your practical material success or the success of themselves. These are people who seem probably in childhood, these can be the father figures who are not necessarily emotionally present because they were so focused on the physical reality. At the same time, in the positive, these are father figures who really accentuate the idea of providing physical security for their children. So in the most positive expression, with a Saturn in an earth sign, you viewed your father figure as someone who provided security for you and focused on your material success and growth to encourage you towards more material success, comfort, and growth. In specific example, if your Saturn is in Taurus, you likely viewed your father figure as someone who's comfort oriented and maybe even indulged with you, the kind who's like, let me go buy you ice cream. But maybe in the negative, they were headstrong and stubborn and stuck in their ways and too uncomfortable and focused on their own comfort to give you that sense of security. In another example, if your Saturn is in Virgo, this is possibly the person who had a father figure who is focused on being selfless to everyone else in both positive and negative ways. They probably viewed their father figure as someone who's always serving others, who's very hardworking, who was always at work potentially, maybe even to the point where they were a workaholic or never quite fully there because they were so tired at the end of the day from their long day of giving to others and hard work. And finally, if your Saturn is in Capricorn, this is likely someone who had a father figure who modeled the idea of pursuing stereotypical success. This is the highly driven father figure, the one who's always at work, so to say, the one who is always striving to be the best, very disciplinary. This is Saturn in its home sign. So this is very strong, masculine, authoritarian energy. So in the positive, this is someone who had a father figure who seemed success driven and ambitious, but maybe in the negative, they seemed too success oriented, materialistic, and so focused on their desires and ambitions that they didn't feel seen in childhood, so to say. And again, I'm only touching on really a small fraction of what each Saturn means, so comment below if you want a longer video. Overall, any Saturn in an earth sign, I think overall, has to overcome their materialistic outlook on life because their father figure, regardless, presented some form of materialistic outlook as a Saturn in earth sign. And so the unconscious restriction you bring to your life now based off of your father figure is a materialistic outlook on your efforts, on your comfort, on life fulfillment, possibly as well. And so these people have to learn to embrace a more feeling side of life and refine what exactly material outcome is valuable to them and what level of material restriction feels good to them. This is also where we find our authority oftentimes because Saturn is unauthority. So identifying how you lean into material success, again, depending on your relationship with your father figure, will change whether you lean into these themes unconsciously by pursuing success, comfort, and material outlooks or outcomes, or if you felt like you were uncomfortable with your authority figure, father figure, you maybe move away from all forms of material comfort and material success. If your Saturn is in an air sign, Gemini, Aquarius, or Libra, it is likely that you perceived your father figure as a highly social person, regardless of which air sign it's in. This is a theme I've noticed with a lot of clients who have Saturn in their air signs. They feel like their father figure was a very social person. This was the father figure who was always out and about, always talking to other people, who everyone seemed to know. And if you have a positive relationship with your father figure, this gave you a sense of idealism or positive outlook on your father figure in the sense of, my dad is someone who everyone can rely on, who everyone knows, looking at this social nature in a positive outlook. However, this can also express itself in potentially a negative way, how I've noticed for those who have a Saturn in an air sign. They may have felt like their father figures were so focused on their social outlook and so focused on their social life and focused on the data that they don't quite see their own children. They're always looking past them, is the idea I've noticed. For example, if you have your Saturn in Gemini, it is possible that you perceived your father figure as someone who's extremely sociable, who knew everyone, but also focused a lot on the data and facts, which in the positive means that you viewed your father figure as someone who's very capable, knowledgeable, and social. But maybe in the negative, this is someone who viewed their father figure as always looking past them, once again, focused more on their social network than them, and very often small-minded or data-oriented to the point that they don't see what is right in front of them. Whereas if your Saturn is in Libra, this is likely someone who had a father figure who seemed to be very sociable, charming, and friendly to everyone, more so accentuating the idea that your father figure was likely perceived as someone who anyone could come to, who anyone could get support from, who anyone could connect with. And in the positive, this is a father figure who really presented this idea of connection. But maybe in the negative, this could have been perceived as a father figure who seeks a lot of approval and feels the need to uphold a societal standard that can feel like a lot of pressure. Finally, if your Saturn is in Aquarius, it is possible that this is someone who has a relationship in childhood of perceiving their father figure as someone who's very innovative and focused on bigger dreams. Very intellectual is how I would describe this. It also could be, in a sense, both in the positive and the negative, someone who viewed their father figure as very rebellious, someone who's always questioning the status quo. And this could have been, in a way, a positive outlook that someone could have had, saying, my father figure, they're so innovative, intellectual, they're focused on these bigger ideas, they're so intelligent and capable. Or on the other hand, they could have seemed cold, detached, and always, again, same ideas, all air Saturns, looking past the child and focusing on the data, the information, and looking beyond them. Again, just touching on a few of the themes that can present themselves with each Saturn sign. So comment below if you want a longer video, since I've missed so much about each one. But overall, all air Saturns feel this sense that their father figure was focused on their social network or the data of things. And so in the positive expression, this can give them a sense of authority and restriction that you bring to your own life of focusing on intellect in social networks. Or in the negative, this could mean if you felt like you didn't have that strong connection with your father figure, you maybe suppress or avoid focusing on intellect or data or social networks, feeling like these are negative things to focus on and isolating yourself. And finally, if you have your Saturn in a water sign, such as Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, you likely viewed your father figure in the positive as someone who is emotionally present, someone who you could emotionally rely on and be emotionally supported by. However, this has a very counterintuitive or contradictory interpretation in the negative, where all this water energy can be presented as a father figure who is emotionally volatile, or so to say drowning in their own emotions, as this is water energy. In specific example, if someone's Saturn is in Cancer, you likely in the positive viewed your father figure as someone who's emotionally supportive and nurturing towards you, someone who you could feel cared for by, so to say. I don't know if I said that sentence correct, but you get the point. In the negative, though, this can be a father figure who's very much needs support and needs their own nurturance and is very sensitive themselves. Whereas if your Saturn is in Scorpio, this is likely someone who had a father figure who seemed very deep and could have a high emotional capacity for vulnerable conversation, capacity for deeper conversation. But in the negative, this can present itself as someone who had a father figure who's extremely volatile, has unexpected highs and lows, who had unpredictable emotion. Last but very not least, if your Saturn is in Pisces, this could be someone who had a father figure who is extremely harmonious, peaceful, and idealistic in their eyes in childhood, someone who looked to their dad as someone who's very idealistic and forgiving and compassionate. But this can also play out in the negative as someone who had a father figure who is disassociated, detached, and stuck in their own head. Kind of similar to having your Saturn in an air sign, there's almost this not seeing the child energy, so to say, which can present itself for all Saturn placements, but I think is accentuated with the air Saturns as well as Saturn in Pisces. Again, very brief interpretations of each Saturn placement, and I've missed so much information about all of them, but overall, any water Saturn is going to be someone who likely in the positive viewed their father as emotionally supportive and deep, or in the negative as someone who is too emotional to provide support for the child. And regardless of what interpretation, this is now your inner authority. Depending on your relationship with your father figure will change how much you lean into this authority, I believe. And so if you had a positive relationship with your water Saturn father figure, then this is possible that you embrace emotional support. You embrace the fact that you need this and want to provide this, and you lean into emotional connections for authority. being an authority in the world by connecting with people. But in the negative, if you didn't have that positive relationship with your father figure and you feel like authority is a weird concept for you, it is likely that you're going to suppress your need for emotional support, emotional nurturance, or emotional connection. I know that this video is getting to be a bit long since we went through all 12 zodiac signs, but I want to take the last few minutes of this video to talk about how do we heal this wound? Now that you kind of identify maybe that, yes, that resonates, this totally feels like my relationship with my father figure, what do you do with that? First and foremost, the first thing that comes to mind when we're talking about Saturn is looking to the house it's in additionally to understand where this wound is going to present itself the most unconsciously. So example for me, my Saturn is in my 7th house. And so I know that in my one-on-one relationships and specifically romantic partnerships, this wound is going to present itself the most unconsciously. And I 100% can see how this plays out. Secondly, understanding the idea that Saturn is not just our father wound, but it's how we own our inner authority. Similar to the moon sign, how the moon sign is our mother, but we can also fulfill these energies for ourselves. It's our birth chart in the end. It's our imprint, and we are not meant to have the world fulfill these things for us. We can be self-fulfilled in many ways. So understanding your Saturn, identifying the moments in your childhood where maybe these wounds presented themselves, observing how they present themselves currently in your life, and looking to the house can help you understand where these present themselves the most, and asking yourself, how can I own this as an authority? Imagining like you're reparenting yourself is really the process here. Being able to say, if I had a parent that was present once again, or if I was to basically reparent my inner child, what kind of authority do I need to provide for myself? For example, for me as a water Saturn, how can I be an authority in my own life by providing myself emotional support? How do I provide myself emotional support? If you're an air Saturn, maybe asking yourself, how do I provide myself with data, with intellectual capability, and with a social circle? How do I give myself a skill set, really? And if you have a Saturn in an earth sign, how do I provide myself material security? How can I bring authority into my life by focusing on material stability? And if you have a Saturn in a fire sign, how can I provide myself with a sense of authority through passion and through desire? How can I light my inner fire and bring my confidence into play? So in short, as the practical tips for healing this is simply put, identifying where you or when you have felt these wounds, what parts resonate, what parts don't, looking to the house, additionally helps you understand where these wounds present themselves the most, and then transforming the wound into an authority by looking to the positive traits of the sign, addressing this as a need of yours, not a request, but a need, and starting to embody that in your life, specifically in the area of life in which Saturn resides. So based off the house that your Saturn's in, that's where you need this authority the most. And we could go further into that and say that you can do work with healing your father wounds, talking to your father, doing journaling, therapy, and all of that. That can all come along with the idea of father wounds, but those are the top tips I'd recommend personally for healing your Saturn as a starting point. So let me know in the comments below, was this video intriguing, interesting, insightful to you? Did you know that Saturn represents your father figure wounds or your daddy issues, so to say? Did your interpretation for your Saturn placement resonate for you? Do you want a deep dive talking about all the potential themes that can present themselves with a Saturn in a specific sign? Let me know what you want to hear next in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay tuned for more videos breaking down the stars and more. If you have more questions, if you want to dive deeper into your specific father figure wounds, daddy issues, all of that, if you want to come from a healed place and become a creator of your reality using astrology, book a reading down below where we can dive deep into any and everything. Sky's the limit. Learn more down below. Check out my other offerings down below as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Sincerely hope you enjoyed. Once again, my name's Isabelle, and from my heart to yours, namaste.